What would you do if the man who once broke your heart returned, not with flowers, but with power enough to burn the world that hurt you? When a single question, who hit you, turns into a storm of justice and vengeance, can love survive beneath the ashes of empire? In a world ruled by money and silence, one billionaire will bring it all crashing down, not for revenge, but for the woman who taught him what humanity costs. If this story gripped your heart and left you breathless till the end, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. More stories of power, love, and redemption are coming your way every week. The city was winding down under a bruised gold sky, its skyline breathing out light through glass towers and rain-damp streets. Elena Rivera walked out of the revolving doors of Blackwell Corp, with a cardboard box clutched to her chest. Inside were 4 years of her life, a half-dead office plant, a chipped coffee mug, a framed photo from the company's first product launch. She had packed them carefully, as if order could make sense of humiliation. Her heels clicked on the marble like faint applause for failure. The board had been polite, excessively polite, when they ended her contract that afternoon. Words like restructuring, budget shifts, and unfortunate timing floated around the room, sterile and rehearsed. Nobody had mentioned Marcus Hale, the CFO whose smirk she had caught when the HR director read the decision. Nobody had mentioned the ideas she'd written, the campaigns that had carried Blackwell's brand into every home. They just signed her out like a name erased from a ledger. The air outside was cold, edged with the smell of rain and exhaust. Elena pulled her coat tighter and started toward the curb, half hoping she could disappear into the crowd. She told herself she wouldn't cry. Not on the steps of the company she'd built, not where cameras watched and whispers traveled faster than truth. Her reflection wavered in the glass door behind her, the same face, the same woman, except now carrying the quiet ache of someone replaced. A familiar voice broke the hum of the city. "Elena." Her breath caught. She turned slowly. The black sedan parked at the curb gleamed like liquid ink, and from it stepped Adrian Blackwell, the CEO, the man whose last name crowned the tower behind her, and the man she had once loved with a devotion that frightened her. He looked the same, tailored suit, steady eyes, the kind of calm that could unnerve entire rooms, but something in his face changed when he saw her. Adrian. The name slipped out before she could stop it. Then she steadied herself. "You shouldn't be here." He walked closer, his tone caught between surprise and something she couldn't name. "I had a meeting upstairs. They told me you were gone." His gaze fell to the box in her hands, then back to her face. "You were fired?" "Restructured," she said lightly, the word bitter in her mouth. "Corporate poetry for disposable." He didn't smile. His attention sharpened, scanning her the way he used to study numbers. Precise, relentless. Then his voice lowered. "Elena, what happened to your face?" Her hand twitched, too late. He'd seen it, the faint bruise along her cheekbone, just barely hidden beneath foundation. She tried to turn away, but he stepped closer, close enough for the scent of sandalwood and rain to find her again. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Just clumsy, that's all." He reached out, stopped midway, then let his fingers hover near her cheek without touching. His composure cracked for a second. Beneath the restraint, anger flickered. "Who hit you?" The question landed softly, but carried the weight of thunder. Elena's throat tightened. She hadn't expected tenderness from him. Not after the distance, not after the years. She shook her head. "You don't get to ask that anymore." "Elena." His tone was low, rough. "If someone laid a hand on you—" "Oh, stop." She stepped back. "You left when I needed you once. Don't start caring now." Silence fell between them, dense and unbreathable. Cars hissed past on wet pavement. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He watched her shift the box in her arms, straighten her shoulders, and walk away toward the streetlight. Her reflection slipped across puddles like a ghost, fleeing a world that no longer wanted her. He stood there for a long time, his hands still at his sides, watching until she disappeared around the corner. The city swallowed her silhouette, but the image of that bruise burned behind his eyes like a scar he hadn't earned, but would somehow have to carry. When his driver finally asked if they were leaving, Adrian's voice was quiet, almost detached. No, not yet. The rain began again, a thin silver mist settling over the tower that bore his name. Somewhere inside, the boardroom lights glowed. Unaware that the man they served was no longer thinking about profit or expansion, he was thinking about a woman walking alone into the dark, and about a question that refused to leave his mind. Who hit you? He didn't know the answer yet, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever it was, their world would soon break as easily as hers had. The next morning, the city was still waking up when Adrian Blackwell sat in his corner office, staring at the reflection in his glass wall rather than the skyline beyond it. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena. The bruise, the quiet defiance in her voice, the way she walked away without looking back. It was a look he'd seen only once before, years ago, on the night she'd left him. Back then they were unstoppable. He had met her when she was 24, a bright, sharp graduate with ideas that sliced through corporate noise. She had walked into the boardroom as an intern and corrected his numbers without hesitation. He should have been offended. Instead, he'd been fascinated. Within a year, she was his protégé. Within 2, she was his partner. Not just in strategy, but in everything that mattered. They had built the company together. While he handled investors and acquisitions, she crafted its identity, its story. Blackwell Corp became more than a corporation. It was an empire born from the tension between their minds. But somewhere along the line, ambition had devoured affection. She began questioning his methods. The quiet manipulations, the way he played markets like chess pieces. She said integrity mattered more than victory. He said victory was integrity. Neither would yield, and pride, that silent third presence in every room, tore them apart. He had convinced himself that she'd moved on, that the distance was mutual. But seeing her again, bruised, humiliated, fired, had shaken something long buried. A knock broke his thoughts. His assistant entered, hesitant. "Sir, you asked for the internal reports from HR and the board meeting minutes." Adrian nodded. "Leave them." When the door closed, he opened the files. The more he read, the more the calm in his expression hardened. The reason for Elena's dismissal was a fabrication, a concocted performance review inconsistency, signed off by Marcus Hale and Vivian Ward. Marcus, the CFO who'd been pressing for a new merger deal Adrian had rejected. Vivian, the PR head with a history of trading insider information under the guise of brand forecasting. He tapped the edge of the file, thinking. The pattern was too precise, too deliberate. Elena had been a threat, not because of performance, but because she had likely discovered what they were doing. She had always seen too much. Adrian's gaze fell on the glass paperweight on his desk, the one Elena had given him years ago, the company's first prototype logo embedded inside. "For when you forget where it all started," she'd said. He picked it up now, turning it slowly between his fingers, and for the first time in years, he felt something colder than anger. Guilt. He opened his laptop and pulled up private access to Blackwell's trading data. Within minutes, the numbers began to speak. Irregular trades linked to dummy corporations, timed perfectly before stock surges. Marcus's signature patterns. Vivian's communications flagged under anonymous IPs. It wasn't just corruption. It was treason, and she had been the one to stumble across it. He leaned back, his pulse steadying. For a man known for his temper, Adrian didn't explode. He didn't shout or call anyone in. His fury was the quiet kind, the kind that built strategies instead of scenes. He called his private auditor, using a number known only to 3 people in the world. "Start a discrete trace," he said. "Pull every movement Marcus Hale made in the last quarter. Use secondary shells, no trails leading here." "Understood, sir. And find out where Elena Rivera's severance came from. I want to know who signed it and how fast." He ended the call and stood, staring at the skyline once more. Below, the city pulsed with life and greed. He knew the system well enough to bend it. This time he intended to break it. In his mind, he replayed her voice from last night, calm, brittle, defensive. "You don't get to ask that anymore. She was wrong." He still did. By noon, Adrian had summoned a few allies from his old investment network, people who owed him favors that couldn't be repaid with money. Over coffee and silence, plans began to take shape. Not loud revenge, not chaos, but precision. He would bleed the company that turned on her without spilling a drop in public. To the world, Adrian Blackwell would remain the unshakable CEO. Behind the scenes, he would dismantle the empire brick by brick, starting with the two who thought they could destroy the woman who once gave it its soul. That evening, as the first of his orders went out through encrypted channels, he finally allowed himself a breath. There was no satisfaction in it, only inevitability. He hadn't chosen war. The board had. And now every number, every deal, every whisper on the trading floor would turn into a weapon he controlled. Because for the first time since she'd walked out of his life, Adrian Blackwell wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing justice, and he never lost what he set out to win. The night city glowed like a circuit board, every window alive with numbers that pulsed and flickered in rhythm with human greed. Adrian Blackwell stood before his office window, silent, eyes fixed on the world he was about to unmake. On the trading screens behind him, Blackwell Corp's ticker blinked like a heartbeat, steady, strong, oblivious. It would not stay that way for long. He had spent the past 48 hours moving like a shadow through the system he once built. His network, quiet investors, offshore accounts, shell companies named after constellations, waited for his signal. A single line of code, one transaction after another, began a slow bleed on Blackwell Corp's stock. Prices dipped a fraction, then a little more. Algorithms reacted, rumors whispered, fear spread. The empire began to tremble without understanding why. By morning, financial analysts would call it an unexplained market shift. By afternoon, it would become a confidence collapse, and by the close of day, Marcus Hale would be making frantic phone calls to reassure investors who had already started selling. Adrian didn't smile. There was no triumph in watching the house he'd built catch fire, only the cold satisfaction of knowing who lit the match. He left the office before dawn, his reflection ghosting across the glass as the first sliver of light crept over the skyline. The city was quiet, half asleep, unaware of the storm rising beneath its polished surface. He drove without telling his driver the destination. When the car finally stopped in front of a narrow brick building on the east side, he hesitated. Elena's name was still on the mailbox. The hallway smelled faintly of paint and jasmine. He knocked once. No answer. Then again. After a long pause, the door opened. She stood there in an oversized sweater, eyes tired but alert, her hair tied back carelessly. The bruise on her face was fading but still visible. Adrian. Her voice was wary, half disbelief, half resentment. "How did you—" "I asked around," he said softly. She stepped aside without speaking. The apartment was small, neat, and painfully quiet. A laptop sat open on the dining table, surrounded by files, sticky notes, and printouts marked in red ink. He recognized them immediately. Internal reports, trading logs, digital trails of theft. She'd been investigating long before he knew. "You found it," he murmured. Her laugh was hollow. "Found it, confronted Marcus and got hit for it. Then fired 2 days later." He turned sharply. "Marcus did that. He wanted the drive I kept. I didn't give it to him." She crossed her arms as if bracing herself. "You don't have to pretend to care. I know how your world works. They're your people." Not anymore. Something in his tone made her look up. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them carried the weight of everything unsaid, the years lost, the pride that ruined them, the tenderness neither had dared to show. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "If they find out you're here, they won't." He took a slow breath. "You were right, Elena, about me, about what I became." He glanced at her papers, at the fragile fortress of truth she'd tried to build. "I let the wrong people hold power. That ends today," her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Check the markets," he said simply. She frowned, turned to her laptop, and refreshed the live feed. For a second, her eyes flicked over the screen casually. Then her breath caught. The red lines were plunging. Blackwell Corp's shares were collapsing in real time. "Adrian, what did you do?" "Corrected a mistake," he said. His voice was even, but something inside him trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of what he'd set in motion. Marcus wanted control through deceit. Vivienne fed him lies to keep the press quiet. They made you collateral. Now they can explain to the world why the company's value evaporated overnight. That's not justice. That's destruction. It's balance. He looked at her, his gaze steady, calm. You lost your dignity because of what they did. I'm giving it back, even if it costs everything. She shook her head, half angry, half struck by the certainty in his tone. You think you can fix what's broken by burning it? No. He stepped closer, his voice quiet now, almost a whisper. But sometimes you can only start over with ashes. For a long while she said nothing. The screens kept flashing behind them, percentages falling, headlines forming. Outside, the city carried on oblivious. Finally she exhaled, her voice soft. And after it's gone? What then? Then I make sure they can never touch you again. He didn't touch her hand, didn't promise anything more. He simply turned and left, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. That afternoon, Blackwell Corp is lost nearly a third of its market value. Marcus Hale vanished from the trading floor. Vivienne Ward's resignation email hit the press within hours, and in the middle of the chaos, Elena sat at her small table staring at the falling numbers. For the first time she realized it wasn't revenge driving him. It was something far rarer in his world, remorse sharpened into action. And as the empire trembled, she understood. Adrian Blackwell hadn't come to destroy her enemies. He had come to restore her name. The news broke before sunrise. Blackwell Corp implodes amidst fraud allegations. Television anchors used words like collapse, insider corruption, executive scandal. By noon, Marcus Hale was in custody, his smirk replaced by panic as cameras flashed in his face. Vivienne Ward had already boarded a flight under a false name, her social accounts wiped clean. The empire that once towered over the market had fallen in less than 72 hours. From his penthouse office, Adrian Blackwell stood alone as reporters camped outside his building, waiting for a statement. He gave none. He hadn't needed to. Every document, every file had already been handed to the authorities anonymously. His name was nowhere in the leaks, but everyone knew he'd orchestrated it. He didn't care about the whispers. For the first time, silence served him in the right way. He had always believed power came from control. But now, watching the company crumble, he realized it came from release, from letting go of the things that once defined him. When evening fell, he left the tower quietly, unguarded, without the usual convoy. He drove himself through the city that had once bowed to his name. The rain returned, light and cold, washing the neon signs into streaks of color on the windshield. He stopped in front of a small design studio on the corner of Bexley Street. Through the glass he could see her. Elena sat at a desk, a cup of coffee beside her, papers spread in measured chaos. There was a calm around her, a steadiness that wasn't there before. The faint bruise on her cheek was gone now, replaced by something far more permanent, self-assurance. When he entered, she didn't look surprised. "I thought you might show up," she said. "I wasn't sure I should," he replied. His voice carried none of the power that had once filled boardrooms, only quiet sincerity. She gestured to a chair but didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The headlines had answered them all. "I didn't do it for revenge," he said finally. "I know," she sipped her coffee, studying him with calm eyes. "You did it because you couldn't stand watching them win." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I finally realized what I allowed them to become." They sat in silence for a long time. The city hummed outside, the storm soft against the windows. For years their conversations had been battles of intellect, pride and control. Now every word came slower, stripped of pretense. "I was wrong about you," he said at last. "And about us." "I thought silence kept us safe. All it did was keep me blind." Elena looked at him, not with anger, but something deeper, acceptance. "We were never destroyed by ambition, Adrian, just by the way we carried it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "There's something I want you to see." Inside were documents, contracts, proposals, and a letter under the new name AR Industries. "I'm starting over," he said. "No board, no shareholders. A clean foundation, and I want you to lead the creative division. Not under me, with me." She read the words, her expression unreadable. Then she set the envelope down. "Thank you." But no, he looked up, almost startled. "No?" she smiled gently. "I've already started my own firm. Small, messy, and mine. I don't need another empire, not even one built with good intentions." For a moment he didn't speak. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You really don't need saving anymore, do you?" "No," she said. "I just needed to stop waiting for permission to move on." He rose from the chair. There was no tension between them now, no unfinished war. Just two people who had once loved each other so intensely it nearly destroyed them, now standing in the quiet peace that follows fire. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back at her. She had already returned to her work, the soft glow of the lamp catching the edge of her hair. For a moment, he let himself remember everything, the laughter, the arguments, the silent mornings. Then he smiled faintly but sincerely. "She doesn't need saving anymore," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cool, almost cleansing. The city lights shimmered across puddles, reflecting a world reborn through ruin. Adrian walked back to his car, not as a man who had lost everything, but as one who had finally learned what power truly meant: to build, to destroy and then to let go. And somewhere in a small studio on Bexley Street, Elena Rivera kept writing the next chapter of her life, unbound, unafraid, and entirely her own.